Hello and welcome along to episode number 3 of TGP Has a Podcast. This week we will be focusing on the fantastic season 20 of the TGP1's season, where we had in the end a 4-way title fight going into the last week of racing. This week I am joined by Andy Zabrowski and Owen Quimby. Hello chaps.
Hello, how are you, Mike?
I'm very well.
Yeah.
Owen, how about you?
Right. Yeah, I'm not too bad. Yourself?
Good. So the reason why we're focusing on this season, first of all, is, as previously mentioned, we had a 4-way title fight going into the final week. But it was just the undulations that we found during the season as well, which kept it so interesting. We had drivers on fantastic form in early parts, which dropped off. We had mid-season slumps. We had drivers who missed races, who ended up coming out as one of the favourites for the title. So all of this came together to create this fantastic season we had, and from memory, this was one of the latter seasons we had on F1 2014 as a game, and on the PS3 era of the TGP series as well. And it just brought together a lot of factors, which we synonymise ourselves at TGP with a fantastic season. Now, looking back, we had some great names competing in this season as well, and a lot of names in different teams as well. Close constructors fight, which led to everything coming together for that final week. So we're going to start off as we normally do with asking my guests what their first thoughts are when they think about this season of TGP1. So I'm going to start with Andy. What are your first thoughts when you think about this season?
Well, I've got to say, Mike, this is, without doubt, the most competitive season in the history of TGP, certainly in the ones that I commentated on. I commentated a lot back in 2014. And, 2014, it wasn't such a great game, but it really did provide one of the greatest seasons ever. And, my overriding memory of the whole season was just, so many different people competing at the front, so many twists and turns, as you mentioned at the top of the show there. And, I think in Italy, it was a really decisive moment in the championship. And I think that was the key to the eventual outcome. And I think that's the most memorable moment. But we'll come to that later on, shall we? But yeah, fantastic season, great action. And, any one of 4 could have won it. And that was what made it so good. I mean, I went into that final week, of course, in TGP we do 2 race blocks. And I didn't have a single Scooby-Doo who was going to win that title, and that's what made it so good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And Owen, what do you think when you think that scene? You actually took part in it, of course.
Yes, I took part. I missed the first few races, came in about halfway through, but mainly because I didn't have the game at the time. But once I got into it, I was fairly competitive. Not as competitive as some other people, and it's a close title fight as well between the top 4 towards the end of the season. Kind of ended up being the top 3, but still quite decent. We had a bit of an unknown as well, with 2014 being quite a different game to 2013, the previous one. We had CJ, David coming up from TGP2, and seeing how they got on along with me, who finished 3rd that season as well.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's funny you mentioned 2 people who got promoted from TGP2 into that season. As you mentioned, David and CJ, as they shocked everyone and hit the ground running in the first race of the season, and both got on the podium. I mean, wow. What a fantastic way to start the season.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. It's crazy, isn't it? It's just mental. You go into a brand new season, a brand new game, as Owen mentioned. It's a brand new game. You don't know what to expect. And then, boom, the people who are on top in TGP2, straight to the front. CJ Beach taking the victory in the opening race. David Muir in 3rd, sandwiched between them, Dan in 2nd. And, we were hoping we'd set the tone in that first race for the season going forward, but we really didn't, did we? I mean, we set the tone for the first few races, but the fact that CJ went on and won the race and David Muir in 3rd was just such a surprise for everyone, with one of the title contenders, Dino Courtney, down in 9th, and James and Johners not even appearing.
No, and really shocked when you think about how that did sort of make you think of, wow, what anything could happen in this season, really. Dan, one of the most successful drivers we've ever had in TGP, sandwiched between 2 people just being promoted. If you'd had said at the start of the race that would be your podium finishers, I think you would have laughed them off, wouldn't you, Ern?
Yeah, definitely. Especially mentioning Dino again. He finished 9th in that race. He started on pole as well, so it all went wrong for Dino that race. But Dan, sandwiched in the middle of 2 fairly inexperienced guys coming to the top level, it's quite good to see. Good for everyone.
Yeah, Really good news. And you mentioned Dean on pole there. That's a theme we'll see throughout this season, of Dino sort of being at the front end of the grid, and maybe not on as many on race days. But looking at this and then knowing what we will come on to throughout the season, did we really think that these two drivers would have a chance later down the line, or was this a one-off?
Well, that early stage, you just don't know. You just don't know. And, initially, you'd have thought it was a bit of a flash in the pan, perhaps. But then we arrive in the second race, and CJ Beach goes on and wins again. So all of a sudden, 2 races down, 2 victories, maximum points from the race, 50 points in the bag, and you're thinking, wow, this man is making a statement. He's come straight up from TGP2. He's won the first 2 races, and he's on form. And again, where is Dino Courtney? One of the title contenders. He's down in 10th place. He's picked up 3 points in the races anyway from the first couple of races, and that is not how you want to start a title push. James is still not involved in the championship. He misses the entire first 4 races, so he's already 50 points behind before he's even started. It's incredible. And Johners, of course, starts picking up the points. He missed the first race, comes home second, and Dan keeping it Mr. Consistent with 4th, and that'll be a continued theme throughout the season from Dan, won't it?
Yeah, it will be, and we're going to pay particular attention to 4 of those drivers that you mentioned there, as those are the ones that we will be talking about a lot during the show. But we sort of had 2 cup upsets in the first 2 races almost, didn't we? We had the Bradford City beating the Chelsea, and actually no, it was 2 different Chelseas. It was like Chelsea and Man United after the first 2 races. CJ fighting off 2 very capable TGP series drivers and winning both of them.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And, Alex, in the end, Alex Coates came home 3rd in that race in Malaysia as well. So another surprise you could argue there. Nobody expected that either. And he actually picked up 2 podiums in the whole season, and they were both quite early on. So, again, that narrative that we just didn't know what was going to happen over the course of the season. The early signs were that CJ was looking good, but who were his contenders? Who were his rivals? And we didn't know after those first 2 races. But, CJ really came out the blocks well after 2 races and was looking really strong. And Owen, at this point, would you have had any idea who was going to come up to challenge him?
No, definitely not. Looking back at the first 6 races, it was a bit all over the shop. Different people on the podium pretty much every race. Alex actually picking up 3 podiums in the first 6 races. Had AOR James picking up a second there. Solanix picking up a 3rd in Spain. And he followed it up with a couple more podiums throughout the season. And then he got the usual suspects of Dan, Jonas, Dino and James all picking up either wins or podiums in those first 6 races as well.
So could you argue then that the beginning of the season was too random? As we've moved on to round 3, you could say that maybe normality returned to a certain degree, as we had Dino winning from pole again. We had Dan the Man finishing 2nd and Jonas in 3rd. This was suddenly a little bit more what we would used to, back to the script. But then suddenly we come to China again. We have CJ Beach winning. We have James picking up a 2nd and Alex Coates in 3rd. And Jonas, Dean and Dan, the highest of those finished 7th. So is this too random, or is this just a switch in the flow of the racing suddenly?
Yeah, it looks like a switch in the pecking order at that stage, doesn't it? It looks like the TGP2 man, CJ Beach, has had 1 rough race in Bahrain and got back to winning ways in China, and that's the way the season's going to go. But certainly that race in Bahrain, made us think, hold on a minute. Maybe they've just been unlucky up to this point, the Johners, the Deans and the Dans, because they fell out the podium and you're thinking, they're the usual protagonists. So surely they're going to continue on the front foot. I mean, Johners has already threatened with a podium in Malaysia. Dan had already threatened with a podium in the opener. So to see them 2 joined in the podium by the man who'd been sitting on pole in those races prior to that, Dino Courtney, it seemed to make sense. Things were adding up. But then, in China, all that was blown out of the water again. Dan retires, Dino 10th, Johners 7th, and CJ Beach winning again. And we've still not seen James. 4 races in, and he's not even appeared yet. And, it is random. It is totally random. But you can sort of see a pattern. You can, from that Bahrain race. You can just see it coming. It's almost as if you can sense that these 3 will get over the wobbles and begin to find some form.
Well, it's certainly, you get the sense that that is how it should be, and I remember that race being particularly sort of dominant for the three of them. There wasn't really sort of looking back for any of them in Bahrain. But Owen, would this have really given CJ a confidence boost? After a poor round in Bahrain and then winning again in China, that actually he could be in with a serious threat here.
Well, he definitely would have thought of winning 3 of the first 4 races. You win 3 of the first 4 races of the season, you're in with a very good. You'd think you'd be in with a really good shout at the title. Look at Button in 2009; he won 6 of the first 7, and he ended up winning the title that year. So being dominant in the early stages and maybe not being able to hold it on, like just hanging on towards the end of the season, can still win you a title.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will prevail again in future seasons that we have coming forward as well. So we then move on to Europe. James finally makes his first appearance in the season, and what a first appearance to make! Hit the ground running. Maximum points from his first race, winning it. John is coming home second, and then a new entry to the podium, as Owen mentioned earlier on, with Jordan coming in third. So this sort of performance in your first race, I mean, we sort of saw the same with CJ in the first round, but, James coming straight in and winning, would that have sent a little bit of shockwaves to some of the drivers who you'd expect him to be fighting with, the Johners, the Dean, and the Dan? And, we've got to consider CJ in this as well at this point in the season. Would that have unsettled you?
I think it would, yeah. I mean, but I feel at this point, the only person that had actually found their feet so far was CJ. And if you're James coming in, you're already 79 points behind the title leader. I don't think you think you're going to be involved in any world championship, but to start off in Spain so well is magnificent. You miss the first 4, straight in, bang, victory, and that is a real statement to make. And it did make a real statement to his title rivals, and I think some early signs of regret might have been coming in from Johners, Dino, and Dan for not making the most of that. The fact that James wasn't there in the opening 4 races.
Yeah, rightly said. And Dino actually missed this week. Dean at this point had taken 3 of the first 5 pole positions. This is how quick he was over 1 lap. He was no slouch on Saturday afternoon. So we then entered the Jewel of the Crown, and we went to the Principality of Monaco, and Johners finally breaks his duck 6 races in to get his first race victory. That would have been a big relief to him, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it would have been. I mean, of course, he was Mr. Consistent in this season. 7th in China was his only, and obviously he missed Australia, but other than that, on the podium, 2nd in Malaysia, 3rd in Bahrain, 2nd in Spain, and then finally getting that win in Monaco. I think, yeah, he'd have been absolutely delighted, because I think he would have wanted to respond to that shot from James as he appeared in Spain. And, Johners really did well to steady the ship and get that victory in Monaco and properly, seriously begin his title bid. Meanwhile, Owen, Dan the Man was having a bit of a mid-season slump after his retirement in China, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He picked up pole for that Monaco race and then finished nowhere. I'll just have a quick look to see where he finished in that race.
I think it's 5th from memory.
5th. Yeah, he had 5th. He had a couple of 5th places, and 8th and the 10th in the following 2 races after this. And that was from a pole in Monaco, and then he sort of picked up his form again after that. But yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mid-season slump, starting off with that retirement in China.
It was sort of the wrong moment for him, really, wasn't it? Just when he wanted to try and capture some form, to try and get his own season going, really, because of those 4 drivers, which we're talking about a lot. He'd sort of, after the first sort of 3-4 rounds, seemed like he was going to be the best one to challenge. But I think that was a big knock to his season, that those sort of 5 races, he's just had 3 of them. He's still got 2 more bad ones to come on. And I think that would have really have hurt, really, wouldn't it, in at this point of the season?
Yeah, it was starting to hurt him. And, it wasn't just him that was hurting. CG Beach had won 3 of the first 4, was finishing 4th and 7th in Spain and Monaco. So it was crazy. It really was crazy. Dan couldn't get his season going properly. CG Beach had got his season going and then stalled it midway through. It was just crazy. And we were beginning to wonder, what would happen next? Was it now a change of the guards over the first 4 races? Was it now James and Johners and Dino, when perhaps he would return because he missed these 2 races, that would be on top? We just didn't know what was going to happen, and that's why we loved the season so much. We mentioned it at the top of the show. So many twists and turns in the title battle, and so many people involved in it, and that's what made it so good. So all of a sudden, CJ was nowhere, off the podium, not involved in it.
No. And sort of from memory as well, Alex, this is when his season sort of ended, as good as. He got a fantastic second in Monaco, which can't be overlooked at all. But then I don't think was anywhere sort of near the podium thereafter, really. Again, someone new coming to the podium there all of a sudden, which, as we saw later on in the season, was a bit more of a rarity of the sort of change in podiums. So at this point, were people starting to get used to the dynamics of the game and how the season was coming to, and maybe were starting to stick to what we thought would be the script after this sort of opening 6 rounds?
I still don't think after 6 rounds we were at that point yet. I think there's an argument that Monaco can just throw up a surprise regardless of whether people's used to the game or not. We know what it's like. I still think at this point we don't know what is going to happen. I mean, 6 rounds in and we've got 7, 8 drivers, 9 drivers have been on the podium. It's nuts. It is absolutely nuts. So, I still think at this point we weren't really sure. And I think, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, I think later on, a couple more rounds yet, and then we get to the point where we go, right, now we have this nailed down. Now we're beginning to see a pattern.
Well, the circus then heads to North America, and James takes his 2nd win in 3 races and his 3rd podium on the bounce. Johners actually upset the pole position order really by taking pole. Dino, he did come back for this race, and actually in the end missed out on a podium. Jordan takes that one, but Dan again, just continues his average form. That's the kindest way to put it, isn't it? Really.
Well, that's being extremely kind. 8th place in Canada for a man trying to compete for the championship is just not good enough. It's not going to. It's going to hurt him come later on in the season, and I don't think 8th place is at all what he wants. And meanwhile, as you say, James, boom, 3 races in, 3 podiums, 2 wins, beginning to pick up form. If he'd started the season, in the first 4 races, I don't think we've been talking about this in the podcast today. I really don't, because I think he was just phenomenal the way he kicked off there. And he won in Canada. Johners 2nd again. The podiums mounting up. Johners only missed Australia, off the podium once in China, but every other race just churning out podiums, doing a great job. And Dino, I think he'll be disappointed with that 4th in Canada, missing the last 2 races. You want to hit the ground running when you return, and to lose further points to James and Johners would have been a sore one for him. But again, still, Sir Lanex coming onto the podium. The surprises are still there. The shocks are still there. It's not fully coming together yet in a title battle, but certainly James and Johners are beginning to find their feet. No doubt about that.
Yeah, certainly. And I know, and you hadn't actually joined the season at this point there, but looking at Dan and John as well, we've got 2 contrasting people in forms at the moment. John as being fantastically consistent, even if not churning out the wins, and Dan who's hit a bit of a blip. How do those 2 different mindsets affect you going into future races? At still quite this early point of the season.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, at this point, you kind of, in Dan's position, you kind of think to yourself, yes, I'm in a bit of a dip, but there's still time to redeem myself. You're better off having it sort of mid-season than right at the end of the season, because that's the worst time to do it possible. You're better off having it mid-season. You got time to redeem yourself and get yourself back on track. Meanwhile, Johners was starting to rack up a decent run of form. He got 2nd, 1st, 2nd in 3 races on the bounce. So, very consistent run from John.
Yeah. Well, he made it count, didn't he? Really, in the races he needed to when he wasn't winning, he was still there. Then we moved on to Austria, which would have been a new circuit actually from memory for the TGP series to go to, and Lord and behold, we actually had James break his rather nice run, and he didn't even finish the race. Jonas wasn't on the podium. Dean did his usual thing of taking a pole and actually managed to get the win here as well. But and CJ finally getting back on the podium. But of all people, to be a bit of a surprise here, we had James only making his second podium appearance at this point, who, without his podium already earlier on in the season, would only have scored 4 points. But here he is with 36 points worth of podiums adding to his name. Andy, I see what you mean. Maybe we hadn't lost the unpredictability of it yet.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly looked like it from Spain to Austria, or Spain to Canada. We're getting somewhere here. And then, no, James out of the race, Johnner's only fourth, and, we've got two people you wouldn't expect to be in the podium, and CJ, well, not CJ, of course, but certainly James on the podium in second, not even third, second, and, you don't expect that. But at this point, if you're CJ Beach, you get the third place, you've been off the podium for 3 races, having won 3 of the first 4, you've got to be thinking, let's build on this. Let's go to the end of the season taking thirds, fourths, seconds, and see what it gets us. If we don't have the pace of the top guys anymore, let's just be consistent. And it never, ever materialised for CJ Beach. Meanwhile, Dino Courtney picks up the win in Austria, and boy, oh boy, does he kick on.
Oh, yeah, great form.
Yeah, definitely kicks on. He picks up, 4 wins in the next 5? Oh, God. 4 wins in the next 5 races, yeah.
And, with 12 pole positions in the 20 races, or 21 races, that is an astonishing amount of pole positions. But the fact he wasn't converting them early on, Mike, was a real sore one for him to take. And it really did hurt his championship hopes early on. And that's why he never really got going until this mid-season, when he finally made it work from pole.
Well, definitely. He got his Bernie Eccleston pole position trophy sorted for that season, didn't he? But, certainly I think Dean's mindset now, as you rightly said, maybe he hit a sweet spot. Maybe now he's looking at it in the right way. So I think, Owen, what does 3 wins on the bounce, how does that suddenly affect your arrivals? I mean, if you're Johners, you've just had a 4th in Austria, you move on to a 9th in Britain. And we mentioned about Dan earlier on, having an 8th and a 10th, as he did in Austria in Britain. 2 drivers there, hitting a periods of bad form where they really could do without, when they've got the likes of Dean and James, both Irishmen, suddenly coming good.
Yeah, and it doesn't help, especially as well with Dean getting so many poles. And back at this point, there's still points for pole position. You get 3 for pole, 2 for second, 1 for third. So you're getting points in qualifying. So he's racking up points in qualifying and winning the races. He's doing Grand Slams, and Jean didn't need that when he was getting poor results. No. As now Jean's hitting his bad run of form, and Dan's starting to turn things around a little bit. Getting back on the podium, and James, coming back from that retirement in Austria to get on the podium in Great Britain. Then following that up with another second place in Germany. Dino winning again, this time not from pole position. That was taken by Dan, who got 3rd, and John as 4th. So finally, we have a race where the top 4 in the race were the 4 that ended up competing for the championship. It's only taken half a season.
Yeah, well, I think we see the record beginning to come in Britain. 3 of the 4 title contenders on the podium there, and then 3 of the title contenders on the podium in Germany. I think that is the turning point of the season, because that again carries on to Hungary as well. So those 3 races are the beginning of things starting to take shape. It's taken half a season, as you say, Mike, but at long last, we're finally getting somewhere.
Yeah.
And Dino Courtney, 3 wins in that period, starting in Austria. Dan the Man, twice on the podium in Britain and Germany, and James, second twice. Johners, 9th and 4th, and a 4th prior to that. I wouldn't call it a slump, but I would certainly call it a dip in form, and I think that's hurt him in his bid for the title, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, do you think that's what would have then maybe put him on the back foot going into the second half of the season? That's really not what you want at the halfway point, is it?
No, absolutely. It did put him in the back foot, because it was his worst run of the entire season. And Johnner's actually, out of the guys that were contending for the title, probably had the best run prior to that. So he was looking to build on that and give himself a nice little cushion over the rest to protect. And I think Austria, Germany and Britain was the moment where he kind of lost that little advantage he maybe had, and the pressure maybe started to tell. But, he did respond well after that, as we'll touch on later, with many podiums. But, I think he really needed a few more podiums in that spell when his title rivals rose their game.
Just to keep the consistency, isn't it, Owen, really? Just to keep your mind in the right place.
Yeah, definitely. That's the consistency wins championships a lot of the time. So you've always got to be there or knocking on the door. Just even if you're having a bad race, you're still knocking on the door for that podium and that win.
Yeah, to be fair to John, he was probably the most consistent of all throughout the season, apart from James, who missed the first 4 races. But if you don't win many races, you only won 2 in the entire season, you need to be on the podium in every other one. And that spell of 3 races without being on the podium hurt him.
Yeah, definitely. So then we move to Budapest, we go to Hungary, and we have Dino Courtney on pole again, his 3rd pole in 4 races. Once again, he can't convert it, and it's James who takes the winner's spice for his first time since Canada. So he's had 3 races not winning, but he has been second in 2 of them. John is back on the podium after 3 races out of it, and Dean picking up the 3rd. Dan, not really anywhere again, is he?
Yeah, it's been up and down to this point for Dan, hasn't it? A couple of seconds early on, and then a run all the way from between Bahrain and Britain before he gets back on the podium. Puts a couple of together, but then just drops back off the podium. It's not enough from Dan, is it, at this stage? Because his rivals are picking up. He himself picked up prior to that, but with 1st, 2nd and 3rd for his 3 other rivals, I think this is the moment where Dan realises he needs to buck up his ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And what of CJ? I mean, at this point, what happened to this guy? He won 3 of the first 4. He got the podium in Austria to try and steady the ship. Britain, he was 4th, 8th in Germany, 5th in Hungary. He just simply didn't have the pace to compete any longer.
I think you're right, and if you look through the rest of the season as well, he was always that. He was the best of the rest, really, for most of the season, wasn't he? And he never really recaptured that spark, that pace, whatever you want to call it, to carry him through to the rest of the season, did he, Owen?
No, he definitely didn't. Yeah, most of the rest of the season for CJ, it's like 4th, 5th, couple of 6th and 7th in there. Very mid-packed finishing from CJ the rest of the season. Dan, as we previously mentioned, looking at the results, it was like he seemed to have all season. It seemed to have like a good run of form, get podiums, and then he would have one stinker of a race, and it'd just drop him back, and that's could be what costs him in the end.
So does this sort of show where we were expecting CJ to have been this whole season? This start to slip into the best of the rest category, because taking nothing away from him, he did fantastically at this point. To have even got 3 race wins at this point was more than any of us would have expected of him. So now slipping into that shoe of what we thought he would have been achieving this season, did he get too comfortable? Was he maybe not pushing himself as much?
Honestly, I think to touch on your first point of expectations, I just don't think you can have any expectations on a brand new game, especially with so many real changes and things like that. Obviously, you'd expect from game to game, the guys that are really fast on Formula 1 games tend to be quick, but sometimes you can't be so sure at the start of a new season, and he hadn't raced in TGP1 before. But yes, I have to tend to agree with you. I think we were a bit surprised early on, and it did start to tell us, okay, maybe this is more like it, and this is probably what his pace should be like. And yeah, I think it is down to that, Mike, to be honest with you. I think that was just kind of where his pace was. It took the other guys a long time to get their feet under the desk in the title battle, really. And by the time they did, I think they were just too strong in the end for CJ.
Yeah, and it was a shame, really, because would we have liked a bit of a David versus Goliath?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 4 was crazy enough. Could you imagine a 5-car title fight like in the real life 2010 season? Would have been absolutely brilliant, and especially if someone came straight up from TGP2 to go straight into the battle, that would have been great to see. But in the end, this season had almost everything, but not quite the David versus Goliath. That was the only thing missing from it in the end.
No, it didn't quite have the fairy tale for our promotee. Then we move on to Belgium, which always throws up a fantastic race in TGP. Dino once again being fastest on the Saturday, and this time again being able to convert it. So now, as Owen mentioned earlier, 4 wins in 5 races for Dino. He is loving life at the moment in the league. But John is out of the podium again. James in third. Dan getting back on the podium in second. Jonas will be kicking himself at this point, won't he?
Yeah, this is brutal punishment for Johners after such a good start to the season. There's Dino winning 4 out of 5, all 5 of them on the podium, and there's Johners only on the podium 1 out of 5. And as I mentioned prior to this was the part of the season that Johners needed to build on, ensure he was still getting those points, those podiums, and it just wasn't happening. It wasn't clicking on a regular basis, and as I said earlier, it really did cost him. But there was no doubt about it. By this point, we were quite clear on who the title contenders were going to be. Dan the Man, again, back on the podium, and then continued that again into Italy on the podium. But it went patchy again after that when we left Europe. So Dan again, up, down, all over the place. Meanwhile, in Italy, James takes the win, Johners second, and Dino, it's his turn to go back off the podium.
Yeah, it is.
Turns everywhere.
Yeah, and he didn't even get pole position. Dan got that one. So, picking up 3 extra points there will help Dan. But, looking into it, again, James first, Jonas second. Jonas will be pleased to get back onto the podium. Dean's first non-podium finish, as you rightly said, since 5 races back on the podium. So to end the European season, before we head to, the Asia part of the calendar, and some tricky circuits in there as well, some demanding circuits. He maybe started losing his head. I think that's probably a bit harsh to say, but was this the area where Dino really should have been hoping to capitalise on maybe taking his run of form further?
Well, at this point, you're thinking Dino versus James. You really are. I know James has missed the first 4 races, but Dino didn't really pick up many points in the first 4 races anyway. No. I mean, he had 2 10ths, a 9th, and the 1 victory. So at this point, you're looking at the number of victories for each of those drivers, and you're thinking, it looks like it's between them. Jonas has only won 1 race. And then, the next 3 races, Dino does win in Singapore. He does look like he's going to continue it with Jonas and James second and third.
Yep.
But then Dino goes and gets 2 back-to-back retirements and blows the championship wide open.
Yeah, he does, because at this point as well, we have Jonas starting an incredible run of 8 back-to-back podiums, which is just an incredible consistency. And as we'll see, it's somehow doesn't quite come about. But as we enter into Japan then, as Andy just said, Dino goes and gets himself retired. Dan takes his first win of the season at this point, it's worth saying. So Dan, has had ups and downs, but somehow been keeping himself in the title hunt just about. Only goes and takes his first win in Japan. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, mate. I think Dan was just about clinging on throughout the entire season in this title fight. He was never really fully in it until this point. No. When Dino Courtney retires in Japan and Dan takes 25 points out of him, then that properly puts him into it. And then in the following race, he finishes second and Dino's out again. So that is a massive... Remember, TGP in 2-week blocks, 2 races in 1 week, remember. That is a mammoth... What's that? 43 points he's taken out of him in the 1 race? I mean, that is how to get yourself into a championship battle.
Well, definitely.
Because up to that point, he wasn't really in it. He was too patchy to be in the title hunt. He hadn't won a race, but then to get first and second with his rival retiring from both, taking a massive 43 points out of him, that put him straight into it, Owen, didn't it?
Yeah, it definitely did. Both James and Dan had the same outcome over those 2 races. Both got 43 points when Dino got nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing was James and not only James, Johners too, 2 third places, and that was a sickening moment for Dean.
Definitely.
I mean, you couldn't ask for a worse result than that. Not only for him to retire in both races, but all of his rivals to be on the podiums in both races. That was a real kick in the teeth.
all of them making inroads onto his championship, which he
Yeah,
just worked so hard on getting a decent buffer for, and he's just seen that chomped away with 2 weeks and 4 rounds to go. So I suppose at this point, you couldn't have put your money on any of them. A week earlier, you would have said Dean, I know, probably is going to be your best shot for the title. Although been patchy, that run of wins just set him aside from all of them. But at this point, we've had... so Dean's had 6 race wins. James has had 5 at this point already. Considering he missed the first 4 races, it's just fantastic. Johnner's only having the 1 and Dan only having the 1. But just their consistency and, those 2 rounds we just mentioned about keeping Dan in it. Heading back to North America, we probably, start to see these guys really enter, new levels of being, showing the class of the field. Where in back-to-back races, they were the top 4, just in different orders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by this point, it's going to be these guys fighting at the front. I think we can all speak for this because we're all league racers, and when you're in a title fight, you practice more, you put more work in. When you're not, you're less motivated. So the longer the season goes on, and the more obvious the order becomes clear of who's fighting for what, the gap between the front and the midfield begins to widen, because the top guys that are fighting for the title have got more to fight for, and they will put the practice in, and they will become quicker at the game. The other guys become slower, and the gap opens up, and it becomes more likely that they will be top 4. And that, as you say, Mike, is what happened in USA and Brazil. We should also mention, we mentioned James missing the first 4. Dino missed 2 himself in the mid-season in Spain and Monaco. So, it really was looking like those 2 were the 2 quickest, but it was just about making sure that they maximised the points. And in those 2 races, James was 2nd and 4th. We had Johners 1st and 3rd, continuing that run of podiums up to 6 races now on the bounce. And then Dino 3rd and 1st, and Dan 4th and 2nd. And you got to feel at this point, Dan, he must have been thinking, wow, after those 2 races, I really needed to win one of those at least. And the fact that he didn't left him with an extreme outsider in the title fight.
I think it almost put his last nail in the coffin, didn't it, really? I think he, as you said, his outside shot of the title had only just now kept him with half a foot in the door of a title. James, only amazingly at this point, Brazil was only his 2nd race in what was 13 that he wasn't on the podium. Just unbelievable levels of consistency. Johnner's picking up good points, and only his 2nd win of the season, of course, in Brazil as well. Heading into the final week, then, we've got Italy again, which proved to be a great race earlier in the season, before heading to the desert in Abu Dhabi. And it was mixed conditions. And how good does that make the racing? And how hard does it make it for 4 drivers taking part in a title fight to guess what on earth they've got to do?
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. I mean, we should just mention going into this race, we're going into the final week, the final 2 races. It was Johners on 283, Dino on 280. So you're thinking it's those 2. James is 16 points off the title on 267, just showing you how important it was to do those first 4 races. Despite his great run, he was still 2 weeks to go, 16 points back. He needed to go out there and win both races and hope for the best. And Dan the man was back on 248, a serious outsider. He needed the top 3 to do what they were doing in the first couple of races, have a terrible race, and he win them. And it just didn't look like it was going to happen for him. But, it's just incredible that James was still 16 points back despite his run going into these races. And the rain came down in the race, Mike, didn't it? And it threw up a lottery.
Well, didn't it? I mean, we should mention the fact that Dan got the perfect start to this race by getting a pole. So giving him those extra points, maybe giving him a bit of confidence if something could happen. And then from memory, Dino got an awful start and was just dropping back. And you were suddenly left with Dan, James and Johners towards the front. And as the race went on, the clouds got darker. And Owen, how difficult does that get in the cockpit trying to make a decision when you've got your race engineer over the radio saying it's going to rain soon, of making that right tyre call? Because you can make a tyre call, but making it at the right time to gain you as much time and places as possible is a difficult art, isn't it?
Oh, it's such a difficult art. You've got to make sure you get it right perfectly. You've got to judge how long your tyres that you're currently on are going to last as well. Because the thing is a balancing act between managing your tyres if you've got to stay out a little bit longer and wait for the wet weather to come, or pit early and just commit to having to make that extra stop to fit for wet tyres, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Andy, from memory, you were actually commentating on these last two races, and I remember you saying there was a period where Joe was in the lead because he stayed out on the slicks for a little bit longer, and unfortunately too long, and didn't make the call to the intermediates in time. Johners was the net race leader at this point, and Joe shot off across the second chicane, skidding and sliding about everywhere. So how does that just prove why it's so crucial to make the right tyre call at the right time?
Absolutely. Martin Brundle always says that you've got to be in the right tyre at the right time, otherwise you lose a pit stop immediately. And it's so difficult for these guys in the title hunt. Like the 2 races to go, it's so tight. If you make one mistake, you could lose everything. Like, forget the fact that these 4 were now suddenly quicker than everyone else by a mile. If you go and stay out on the track a lap too late on those tyres, 1, you could end up in the barrier, and 2, you're going to be so slow that you might not finish 4th. The field spread that we've got at this point might be academic because the amount of time you lose by being on the wrong tyre at the wrong time is so much that you will not be finishing 4th. You'll be finishing 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. And that is what these guys had to consider. Just how much can I afford to lose here? How much can I gamble? It was different for Dan, though. Dan could go for it. He had to go for it. He had no other choice. And in the end, it didn't work out because he found himself queuing behind his teammate, didn't he?
He did. And awful moment for the Williams team with Jean getting to the pits. They both thought they made the right call at the right time. And in fairness to Johners, at the time when he put on the intermediates, he had made the right call at the right time. That was perfect. But Dan was maybe hoping that John wouldn't and tried to come in the pits at the same time. They queued. The pit lane was busy, so Dan had to queue for even longer and found himself slipping down the order. Dino did as well. But it was the last 2 to 3 laps where we saw a masterstroke in strategic call. The rain kept getting heavier, and James made the call to go on the full wet tyres. No, he wasn't leading the race at this point. Johners still was, but he made the gamble to go on the full wets, and he was hunting Johners down, and he was catching him.
Yep, absolutely. And remember, James, as I mentioned, 16 points back going into this race. So he realised he had to go out and win these races. There was no point doing the same thing as Johners if he's behind him on the road. And he took the gamble. He went on the full wets. And what happened? On the final lap, he got him. He got him on the run down to Ascari, eased past, put himself into the lead of the race. Johners could only manage second. And suddenly, it was game on. James was now into the title battle with Johners. Dino, in all of this, disconnected or retired, only got 1 World Championship point. Dan, after having to queue, finished 4th, and there was a surprise return to the podium for Sir Lanex. And this shows you, when it rains, you can get surprises. This is surprises we were used to at the start of the season. This was out of the ordinary by this point of the season. And Sir Lanex picking up that 3rd place shows what the wet weather can do. It can throw things up, but what a call from James. Potentially a title-winning call from James. He threw all the eggs in the one basket, got what he wanted, and we went into Abu Dhabi with the title standings looking like this after the qualifying. It was Johners on 303, James on 294, Dino on 284, and Dan on 260. Dan out of it. Game over. Finished. 3-way fight. In fact, Dino Courtney, he was out of it as well, wasn't he? So,
yeah.
294, 203. No, he was just clinging on by the skin of his teeth, Dino Courtney. But he needed Johners and James to have an absolute shocker. And, as it worked out, Dino was on pole, James was second, and Johners was third. So, Johners, 9 points ahead, just needs to keep James in his sights, finish 1 place behind him, and it's in the bag. And what happened, Mike?
Well, you mentioned as well, how crucial that pass was on the last lap. That was a 14-point swing Jonas,
Yeah.
if he'd held on to that, would have been going into that race with a 23-point gap over James, and you would be saying that that's almost it. It's as good as it, with a maximum of 28 points up for grabs with the 3 points for pole. And to suddenly be denied of that on the last lap must be difficult. But as you rightly mentioned, coming then into Abu Dhabi, it gave us a fantastic potential for a climax. And Owen, it seemed to be Jean on the back foot on the opening lap after an interesting battle with Dean, I remember.
Yeah, definitely on the back foot. He put himself in a difficult position. All he has to do really is just follow James home. That is all his strategy was for that race, and it didn't go well for him after that first lap.
No. Well, a second would do it for Jonas, no matter what. And after the opening lap, he found himself third, behind Dean, who, as you mentioned, was pretty much out of it. James pulling away at the front. What do you do at this point? You're seeing the championship literally running away from you. Your mind's racing. You're wondering how you're suddenly going to make up all this time and catch someone, let alone overtake them, as we know how difficult it is to overtake it at the Abu Dhabi circuit. What's going through your mind?
Should ask Fernando Alonso. I mean, he couldn't get past Vitaly Petrov. He knew if he could get through him and a couple more cars, the championship was there for him. And it just wasn't to be for Jonas. And it must be so frustrating. I've never been good enough to be in a title fight and just have the championship one place up the road. That's why I'm a commentator. But it must be so frustrating. The target in front of you is a moving target, and it's not going to move out of the way just to help you in a championship. And Dino Courtney, being the same nationality as James, might have been motivated to try and help his Irish friend out and make sure there was parties in Dublin that night after the TGP title, because it was quite the battle, and it was just so frustrating for Johners not to get ahead, and it just shows you just how important that 14-point swing was in Italy. It was massive.
Yeah, it's definitely important, that 14-point swing, and sitting there from title experience, being in title fights myself in TGP2 and TGP cars, you're just sitting there and you can see it slipping away, and there's not a lot you can really do about it. It's just crushing.
Does frustration get the better of you at that point? And maybe if it's key to keep as level head as you can, and just make sure you're hitting your break points. You're not making any little mistakes, which is costing you time, which frustration leads to. Is that the key?
Yeah, the key is just trying to keep a level head, and the best way of doing that is, luckily, if you're not in a battle, you can do that. You can just go at your own pace, and then you can try and find ways to build yourself some time. If you're in a battle, and it's so much harder to do that, because you've got someone sitting up your chuff trying to get past, or you're trying to get past someone, and you need to get past them as soon as possible to have any chance of being able to still win that title.
Yeah. Well, the pit stops came and went. James was still out the front, and going into the last lap, Jean found himself 3 seconds behind Dean. James, at this point, could almost taste the champagne of a TGP1 title, couldn't he?
Yes, I think at this point he's thinking, right, this is it. But we've seen it in real life, haven't we? We have. Like, if James crosses the line and wins, he still has to wait. It's a waiting game. He doesn't know it's won until it's won. If Dino makes a mistake, goes wide, Johners takes second, and it's game over. So James is doing everything he has to do. He missed those first 4 races. He was playing catch-up ever since. He knew going into those final 2 races, he had to win them both and hope that the pressure told. And he forced his rivals to submission. And in the end, he did. And hats off to him. Johners couldn't get ahead of Dean, and that was it. But I just want to ask Owen, as he says he's been in these kind of things from TGP cars before, do you start going desperate, Owen? Do you start going for moves up the inside, dives? I mean, at what point do you need to get desperate when you've got nothing to lose? At what point do you do that?
If you're close enough, what I always feel like in these situations is you've got to try and keep a level head, but then last lap and you see it going away, you'll try anything to get that position. If you're in a battle, you'll just try literally anything. You'll try a move in a very unconventional place. You'll maybe just dive it from a year back and hope for the best, because you think to yourself, well, I'm going to lose it anyway. What's the point in trying to stick behind him? Might as well just go for it.
And was that maybe a little bit of the mentality that we maybe saw from James during the season? I mean, throughout the whole season, what did he have to lose? He didn't lead the title until the last race. A very Vettel 2010-esque. But, was that maybe why he ended up doing so well in the end, coming away with the title? Because at no point did it actually look like it was his title to lose.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because I think that explains so much in the Italy gamble, the famous Italy gamble to go onto the other tyres, because he was never in the position to throw it away. He was never in the position to throw it away. He was always playing catch up. He was always trying to do something different. And when he did that something different in Italy, he just realised, oh, hold on a minute here, I've got a chance, but I've still not got it in my hands. I just need to win the race and hope for the best. And it worked. And I think you're absolutely right, Meg. I think that is a key factor. I mean, pressure can tell. We saw it with Dino when he led earlier on in the season. Japan and Russia derailed him. Then the 10th in Italy hurt him as well. It just shows pressure can tell. And I think it was a real advantage for James in that sense that he didn't have that pressure. But it was disadvantaged by missing the first 4 races. Let's not forget that. He's done an incredible job to be on the podium in every race bar 2 after that, to put himself in the position to actually win it. And the fact that he did win it is incredible, and he's the deserving champion because, of course, he missed 4 races, missed more races than anyone. And I think the right man won the title in the end. Wouldn't you agree, Owen?
Yeah, I think, James, when you look at the results from, barring those first 4 races, you look at the results over the course of the season, he only had 1 finish off the podium. The other race, he didn't finish on the podium, he retired. So, yeah, 1 finish off the podium in, 16 races? That's really remarkable and fully deserves a title for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's nice to be able to look back on a season like this so fondly and really have that sense of unpredictability go through you again and really not know which way it's going to go and who's going to take which uppercut and advantage over your rivals to get to a point where you're in a position to pounce when someone really needs to make that call, which is going to win or lose you a race.
I think there was 2 key moments in the season. We always look at the turning points and things like that. 3. I think the first one was CJ's demise. Early doors, it looked like the man was going to go and run away with it, for goodness sake. But I think that was the first turning point. I think by mid-season we saw things changing. I think Dan was always playing catch-up, so there was really 3 men properly in this. I know Dan was in it to the end, but 3 men properly in this. And I think the second big turning point where Dino was on the back foot, as we touched on earlier, was Japan-Russia, with 2 retirements. All of his rivals scored in those races. And then the third big turning point that killed Johners was definitely James winning in Italy and turning it round. So I think they were the 3 key moments that decided this title race, and the biggest of them was probably the Italian one. Yeah,
completely agree. James, 13 podiums in 15 races, 7 race victories. That's a hammer blow of any, I think, and to have missed the first 4 races and to come out with that, I think, is deserving of a title wholly and undoubtedly. Well, chaps, it's been fantastic reminiscing on season 20 of TGP1. Thank you ever so much for joining me. And we look forward to hopefully some TGP1 seasons in the future being just as dramatic. Maybe we will have that last lap where someone does make a mistake and the waiting game gets the better of the person who thinks they got it in their hands, and we have a change around for the title. Maybe we will have that in the future, but we certainly can have no complaints of the season we were treated to in this occasion, can we?
No, an absolute classic. Probably one of the best seasons, ever in TGP. And hopefully in the future we can have it again. I'd love to see a 4-way fight right to the end again. But it's great to reminisce over such a great season. And it's been good fun.
Perfect. Well, chaps, thank you very much for joining me. We'll be back next week where we take a preview to the first season of TGP GT, which will be taking place on the GT Sport game. And we will be joined by 2 of the title favourites. So join me next week. But for now, it's goodbye from all at TGP.